Good afternoon, everybody. Today we have Mr. David Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy is a British television producer. In 1997, he was appointed executive producer on a show called The Bill, having previously worked on the show as producer since the early 1990s. He left the show in late 2001. His final episodes appeared on screen in January 2002. He also served as series producer on The Casualty from 2002 to 2003. I give you Mr. David Kennedy.
So as you can tell, I didn't submit my bio. Interesting things here. So a little bit about me. Dave Kennedy, also known as Relic. I'm a practice lead at a company called Secure State that's actually probably about 20 minutes away from here in Cleveland, Ohio. I've been doing security for about 9 years. I run the practice for our profiling team, which is the penetration testers, the web application security, and all that fun stuff. I'm the author of Fast Track. So for those of you that know Fast Track, you probably will have a good idea at the end of this presentation, as well as a good slogan that I always like to use that I get made fun of all the time with. But yeah. Prior to that, I was in the Marine Corps. I worked in the intelligence agency, I did 2 tours in Iraq, one in Afghanistan, one in Bahrain, and a few other areas. And I guess I got yelled at last time because I said I worked for the NSA at ShmooCon, so I'm not supposed to say I worked for the NSA again. So it didn't work for the NSA. But I actually became an instructor for the intelligence agency for wireless exploitation as well as forensics. So a little bit about Fast Track. I was breaking into a client one day, and I realized that a lot of the tools out there were really lacking in a lot of areas, or they just plain sucked or didn't work. And really started automating a lot of some of the attacks that we did during a pen test, and wanted to disseminate those to my team members or to other people. And had been doing work with the Backtrack guys for a long time, and knew them very well. And thought of a cool concept of just coming up with a tool that had some pretty cool attacks in it that weren't necessarily in Metasploit or weren't necessarily downloadable or didn't really have a tool out there that did exactly what we did, and build upon that. So what is Fast Track? Fast Track's a suite of custom coded tools that automate some pretty wicked attacks. It's designed for penetration testers to help automate some attacks they may not have been able to do before. Main purpose is to exploit various weaknesses and gain root access. That's the whole point of it. Some new ways of payload delivery that never really been done before, which is pretty interesting. We'll talk about that. And really help security teams identify weaknesses within their networks. I know quite a few people that bring it in-house and use it to test specific vulnerabilities within their network, whether they're trying to identify exposures or prove it to management. Really see what type of areas that they can actually exploit their systems. So we're going to have a few different scenarios. We're going to have some SQL injection on steroids. We do some SQL brooding with a twist, and a bunch of other different types of attacks. So you're a pen tester for company X. One host responds. It's a web server on port 80. What do you do? So we got our nice, nifty Linux machine right here. I do things live. I have movies as a backup just in case. But we're going to go to our website that we're going to want to attack. Let me open these guys up here. So we got this, high security zone, top secret, probably not a good place you want to break into. And this is the only website that we have. Well, with Fast Track, there's some really cool tools that you can use to start identifying specific vulnerabilities within the network. And let's pop a box. So Fast Track's got a lot of modes. I'm going to kind of primarily covering the GUI mode in it, but we'll talk about the interactive mode and command line mode later. But basically, it runs a web server on 4444, similar to what you'd see in a Metasploit. And this is the Fast Track web interface. And interesting enough, we're at the office, and we have a keg at the office, and we're all drinking beers, and we're trying to come up with a cool slogan for Fast Track. And somehow we got in a discussion with someone that, his wife always complains, yeah. So I'm like, that's a perfect slogan for Fast Track, so there we go. So that's how that came about. But what's great at Fast Track is it's got some really nice, cool, nifty lights that light up over the eyes. So yeah, that's all I got, guys. Have a good night. No. No, but it's got a lot of different types of tools on the left-hand side. A lot of them are primarily focused on Microsoft SQL, which is a pretty heavy one to hit. It's also got a lot of different ones we'll be talking about. But what I wanted to show you is what we call the SQL Components tool. And my presentation style is I like to present like Houdini. And I'll show you some really cool magic and doing some crazy things, and I'll explain how I do it afterwards. So without further, I'll show you. I'll explain exactly what this is doing in a few minutes here. It just looks cool right now. It's got green lettering and stuff, right? Wish I had some water. Oh, thanks, man. And nothing happens. That's great. It's usually what happens in a demo. That's why. All right, hang on. Now, I use, just for presenting a NOTACON, I hard-coded my IP address with no internet access. So I got a new DHCP address, which is always great, right? That's the reason I'm sticking with it. We should have it here. Yeah, cool. We're good. There we go. Let's do it one more time. Sorry about that. That's my IP. That is not. There. So we go through this long waiting process of the cool matrix-looking stuff, and but while we wait, we can look at the cool lights. That's all I got for excitement, just letting you guys know. So. And we should see it hit here in 2 seconds. There we go. Hey! Hey. All right, so, what's that? This is trying to upon me. So what the hell just happened? There's a lot of cool matrix-looking stuff. So what SQL Owners really does is it'll scan for web servers. You can specify subnets. You can specify a specific IP address. And what it does is it auto-crawls the website looking for any type of post parameters. And I added query string parameters recently, so it's looking for query string parameters. Really any way that can identify any potential injectable points into the website. It tries different methods of trying to complete the SQL statements. I incorporated with the new release in 3 days. Time-based attacks. So basically it actually looks for time-based, where we're performing SQL injection, and it'll wait for maybe 10 seconds, and then if it's successful, it knows the SQL injection parameters completed right, and it'll actually start exploiting the system. It does both blind and error-based SQL injection. Blind takes forever. It tries to elevate your privileges to S8 writes if you're not already running with those. I also have in 3 days the latest SQL privilege escalation exploit, so it actually tries to escalate your permissions into that. Pain in the butt to get it to work, but it works. Re-enables the XP command shell if it's disabled. And in 3 days again, it automatically rebuilds the XP command stored procedure if it's already been deleted off of the system itself. So fun stuff. Drops your payload onto the system, and we use a really cool technique that I'll explain about here in a second. And then basically you get full system compromise of that specific system itself. So here's just a quick demo of what we're actually going through. Is anybody familiar with SQL injection? It's been around for 10 years. It's not anything new. But when you're actually executing the SQL commands, you're executing on the back-end database, not the actual web server itself. So you're browsing this website, which we had this website up. The top secret website. This is just a normal website. Well, with SQL injection, if they're not properly coding the web applications properly, you can inject some garbage into here that will cause it to error out or bypass logins or whatever else is known with SQL injection. And what Fast Track does is it tries to find those, exploits them, and actually goes to the back-end databases. And most companies, where do they put their databases at to protect them? On the internal network. So typically, databases reside on the internal network in a lot of cases. So definitely can be some bad stuff if you get access to the box itself. And what do databases hold typically? Sensitive data, a lot of times, usernames and passwords, credit cards, social security numbers. We've seen companies that store 10 years of credit card data on their SQL servers. Probably not a good thing. Yeah. So a quick explanation of what just happened. We performed SQL injection to the MS SQL backend. A series of commands were performed to elevate our privileges, re-enable the XP command shell, start to echo our files onto the underlying operating system. Now, there's a really cool method for delivering our payloads. Since we're not actually directly interfacing with memory, it's not like we could just pop our shellcode into memory and get a backdoor back into the system. We're actually echoing files to the underlying operating system. And there's a couple of ways of doing it. One is you can use, is anybody familiar with echoing an FTP answer file or echoing a TFTP file that will pull from the systems? A lot of times, TFTP, for example, isn't allowed, UDP outbound. Same thing for FTP. Anybody that's doing any decent egress filtering is going to block those. So what we wanted to do was drop a payload onto the system, really using that original connection that we attacked the server from, and not having any other connection, period, until we execute our payload. Now, there's a few ways that you can do that, but the ways that are currently out right now don't meet our requirements. So, for example, say you drop an interpreter payload in there. Interpreter's got to go back, connect, drop a whole bunch of information, pull the what we call a stager, and download the rest of the instructions of the rest of the payload. So what we wanted to do was have the whole payload on the server itself, execute, and then shoot out. And that was a little challenging because there really wasn't anything out there to do that at this time. So what we did was we echo our file using what's called a binary to hex conversion method, where we take our binary, convert it to hex onto the underlying operating system. Basically, it gets echoed into a text file, for example. And then when you use Microsoft's Windows Debug, which is a tool that's by default installed on all Windows systems, and what that debug does is it converts it back to a binary for us. So we just send a whole bunch of hex over the wire, gets dropped on the underlying operating system, and then Windows says, okay, convert it back to a binary for us in a sense. Now, again, there's a problem with this is we're limited to a 64K limit. Windows Debug only lets you use a payload size up to 64K. Now, that's challenging if you're trying to go to the larger payloads. It's definitely above 64K. So we had to come up with a way of getting around that. The way we did it was we just took our stager payload, where we drop it onto the system, and basically all it is it takes any type of raw hex that you input to it and spits it out as binary. So it's really essentially, in a sense, a debug without the 64K restrictions, and we completely get around any type of restrictions that we might have had with the 64K limit, which is definitely really nice. So we use our stager using the Windows Debug method. It's really a 5 kilobyte file, so it's tiny. It's a pretty simple program. It just takes in raw hex and spits out binary. It's pretty simple to program. Any questions on that before I move on? Pretty much out of luck on this specific attack. Yep, absolutely. So we successfully bypassed the 64K restriction on the Windows Debug. This allows us to drop whatever payload we want to. I mean, it could be a 60 gig file for all it cares. It'll probably take 20 hours to spit out the raw binary for it, but typically we basically just bypass those restrictions. So scenario 2, you're a pen tester for Company X. Company X gets picked on a lot during this presentation. Internal pen test. Organization probably uses MS SQL. What are you going to do? Use Fast Track, right? Oh, wait, I forgot. Yeah. Let's pop a box, okay? So you're going to go to Fast Track and you go to the MS SQL Brooder. and we'll just do a quick root. Fast Track also has a built-in word list as well. It's multi-threaded. It's always good. Now, what I added recently within the past 3 weeks was the advanced identification. When SQL Server installs, SQL Server 2000, for example, will install and port by default 1433. SQL Server 2005, they can randomize those ports, so it's not always going to be 1433 all the time. So that poses a problem for us because we're not going to exactly know what port SQL Server is running on. Well, luckily, port 1434 UDP is installed by default on SQL servers, and you can query that to grab the port number for the SQL servers itself. So Fast Track incorporates that to go through and actually look for UDP port 1434, query the server, and then look for the port that the dynamic ports are using for SQL. We're not going to do that in this scenario. Let's hit no. And this is going to do a quick one. Now, has anybody done a pen test for a large-sized company before that uses MS SQL? No? Wow, that's okay. We got a couple. Finding any type of blank essays or weak essay passwords in a pen test is so easy. I mean, you'd be surprised in a dev environment or just a really crummy admin or something. I mean, they're all over the place all the time. I mean, I'd be surprised if you went into one where you didn't find one. But basically what it does is it tries to find the SA account or the systems administrator account in SQL, brute forces it, and it does all the same stuff as the previous one did. This one's a lot quicker. And Fast Track does have its built-in, its own custom-packed reverse shell that gets past antivirus. It's usually pretty easy to get past antivirus nowadays. But it also uses Metasploit payloads as well, so I've integrated both. Uh-oh. Oh, I got that connection open. That would be why. So again, it'll spit a bunch of matrixy looking stuff towards you. Really what we're doing at this point is sending the payload through a hexadecimal stored procedure, XP command shell, and putting that on the underlying operating system itself. So you see on the left-hand side, it scrolls by and looks really cool, but it's actually doing something. Hey, hey. Got another box. You can also use the word list file as well. It takes a lot longer, and I won't demonstrate that, but you can also import your own word list or whatever you want to do with it. So just a quick explanation of what I already talked about. Looks for SQL servers, again, on 1433. If you want to not use the advanced, or you can use the UDP 1434 to find it. Brute force is the SA account. You can also specify your own account, so if you know the account name of the SQL server itself, can also go through and use that as well. Elevate writes re-enables the XP command shell. I ran into a problem which was interesting, and I haven't had a chance to talk to HD about this, but Interpreter on Server 2008 is having some problems without when dep is enabled for executing Interpreter, which is really interesting because you wouldn't think it would have any impact on it whatsoever. However, I added the disabled dep in there just in case you did run into a Server 2008. Does disable it. And then we drop our hex to binary stager, and then drops our payload onto the system itself. From here, we basically have full access to that machine, and you can do whatever you want to it. You can do Interpreter, command shell, DNC, whatever. So you're a pen tester for Company X. Again, picking on Company X. You scan a subnet, one web server responds, and you're manually going through and testing it out, and you see that there's a susceptible query string parameter. Does anybody know what a query string parameter is? It's just you're going to Google.com, you see a question mark, it says blah equals whatever and whatever. It's just the parameters that are passed in URL bars typically considered a query string parameter. But really what we're looking at is attacking that. And we're going to go back to our uber secure top secret site here. So we got query string parameters passed on the top here, and with login blah, password blah doesn't work. Typically, SQL injection, you do the thing you learned day one when you learn SQL injection, or 1 = 1, get you past the website. You can also do some more enumeration of tables. But what Fast Track does really well is once you've identified the query string parameter as susceptible, you can specify that it's susceptible. And we're going to use the MS SQL injector. I'm going to use get. And boom, full access. Let's pop a box. Oh, did I forget that again? I did, didn't I? I'm so bad at that. So, yeah, let's pop a box. I'm all set now. So when you already know the website is susceptible to SQL injection, it's definitely a good one to go after. It supports both query string parameters and post parameters. Let's just do a quick example of the post parameter attack. It's really easy. Use the Microsoft SQL injector. You go to the post binary payload attack. You just enter the website 10.201.55.128 default.aspx. And does everything automatically for you through the post parameters. Pretty easy. So I talked about the binary to hex payload conversion that we use when we're actually going through and exploiting these systems. I built in Fast Track a binary to hex payload converter for you. So if you want to use your own executables, like a netcat or whatever you want to use, you can pop it into here, and it'll put it in the actual debug format so that you can actually convert it for yourself if you have access or you have a shell to the system. You don't want to use methods like FTP or things like that. This will automatically convert it for you. It's pretty neat. And here's the kind of output that it looks like. Here we're actually echoing into file T, and then we use Windows Debug to convert it, and then it creates a bin file for us, and we just rename that as an executable. And our payload is on the system. We'll never have to worry about any type of connections. Good stuff. So again, you're a pen tester at Company X. You're doing service identification on a remote host and identify a vulnerable service. Box is running Windows 2003, Service Pack 2, R2, and there's no exploit available for that version. What do you do? Oh, hang on. Let's pop a box. Didn't forget that time. What I do in Fast Track is I like to take a lot of the exploits that aren't in Metasploit, because Metasploit has definitely a great amount of exploits out there. But I'll take the ones that aren't in there. And actually, sometimes I put the ones that are already in there. Like I was one of the first guys to release the MS-0902 Universal one, the memory corruption heap spray. I uploaded it to Millworm, and I also incorporated that into Fast Track itself as well. But we'll just do a quick example here of the MS-08067 buffer overflow and show you how easy it is in Fast Track to use. So just click on it. It gives you a little bit of information who the original exploit writer was and different targets. What I usually like to do is, in most of the exploits, I'll either try to find a universal where it's in some sort of DLL that the application's loading, or I'll actually start looking at different memory addresses or jumps within specific service packs. So like, Service Pack 3, what's the jump address for jump ESP or something like that. I'll try to do that for all the different browsers out there, all the different flavors out there. So 2003, Service Pack 2, Service Pack 1, anything that I can find out there from that perspective. But in this scenario, I'm just going to go after 2003 Service Pack 2. Let me get back in this box real quick. Grab the IP. So 131. Man, it looks easy. So we just did MS-08067. Just an FYI, typically whenever you're using Metasploit or these type of exploits, we're less concerned on the exit functions and not having the service crash. So when you're using these, like I know specifically for this one, the actual service itself doesn't like it too much, so you have to either restart the service or the computer. It doesn't crash the system, but people will be definitely saying they can't get to their file shares. So again, they're typically ones that aren't in Metasploit. I'm not trying to recreate the wheel in any regard to Metasploit. It's a phenomenal tool. HD is brilliant, and the developers he has on his team are brilliant. Typically, I just try to rewrite the ones that are in Millworm as proof of concepts, or try to make them universal. Scenario 5, normal avenue of attack through the external presence aren't working. They have one web server open, all static HTML pages. One of the pages has a company listing of point of contacts within the organization. What do? Chris, that'd be a good answer for you, man. Client side. There we go. So I'm actually going to show a movie because when I run this in my VM, it's not very happy. And what Fast Track, the mass client attack does, it's similar to the browser auto-own functionality. And actually, I have to take credit. I did come out with this before the browser auto-own came out, so I'm not trying to rip off Metasploit here. But what it does is it creates a fake website using Python modules and injects a bunch of iframes into the website itself. And usually, it'll use all the client-side attacks from Metasploit, as well as ones that aren't necessarily in there. I'll try to add 5 or 6 different types of client attacks that might necessarily be in there, also incorporate it into this as well. And as soon as someone goes to browse the site, it has a list of exploits. It basically just starts going through and tries exploiting until you get a full compromise. What I also added with 4.0 is custom EtherCap plugins, where you can ARP cache poison victims on your local subnets, and it'll replace all the href tags with your website. So they go to browse google.com, and they click on the link, and now they're clicking on your site, and it's got some nasty stuff it does towards you. So right now, this is going through and creating a bunch of handlers on Metasploit for the client-side attacks. And then it also does the custom exploits on the back end using the Python HTTP server. So once it's actually started, someone would go over and click on the link, which I think I panned to it. Yep, cool. A little early. A couple more seconds. There we go. So it basically says sorry, this page did not load correctly, and at this side, it's actually firing away a ton of exploits at it. Now, I do have intentions once my 10-month-old gets a little bit older and I have some more time to devote to this, but using user agents to identify exactly what browser it is, so we're not loading, we're not sending OS X exploits at a Windows machine and those type of things. So right now, it's kind of it just sends everything at you and hopes it pops your box, but we'll speed along here. There. So we can see here we had a successful exploit, and boom, got a full compromise. I forgot that again, son of a. So the mass client attack imports all the Metasploit client-side attacks. There's a few custom ones again in there. I believe I added the MS08, what was it, the client-side one for the last one. It was in 2008, 97, MS08 097 maybe. And then MS 0902, which is now on Metasploit. As soon as someone connects to it, all mayhem breaks loose in that person's computer. Again, you can also do a piggybacking of EtherCap, and it's pretty easy within the actual Fast Track itself. You have here EtherCap enabled or disabled, and then you just hit the victim's IP address, and it'll go through and ARP cache poison them and do all the crazy stuff with EtherCap custom filters. Next one, you're a pen tester for Company X. On an internal penetration test, you identify a patch missing on 2 systems. NetBIOS is unpatched and susceptible across the entire network. You want a ton of shells, what do? This one actually isn't really use fast track. It's really mostly use Metasploit. But what I did was I just took Metasploit's auto own and I just made it a lot easier. There's DB load SQLite 3 and DB create and all those good ones that you have to do in order to get the Metasploit auto own functionality to work. And if you're not familiar with it, what Metasploit auto own does is it'll go through and port scan a specific system. It uses SQL databases to store all the information. You can also import like nested scans and those type of things. And once it identifies a service that's running, it automatically goes to Metasploit's database and says, okay, port 80 is open. I have 60 exploits that are for port 80. Let's fire them all at them and see if one comes back. It's not a vulnerability scanner in any sense. It's essentially dumb to when it fires the exploits to it. It'll just fire whatever it is, regardless if it's Linux or Windows or whatever. So it's kind of like a brute force of exploits. And just a precursor, if you're ever going to run this in your network, just very isolated, 1 port, maybe 2 ports tops. You don't want to run this across your entire network, completely flailing buffer overflows and exploits over your systems because they will absolutely crash. So this goes and preps and does all the answer files for you for loading the SQLite database, and then it will port scan and do all this crazy stuff for you. And uses Nmap for the port scanning portions of the auto own functionality. And this literally is like, it's funny, if you actually Google fast track, most of the people that make fast track videos only make it of this because it's probably the easiest one that you could ever use. And it's kind of silly because it was really only maybe like 10 lines of Python or something like that. But I guess not a lot of people know how to use a lot of the good stuff out there. So it's got 123 exploits it can use, and I probably should have just picked a couple ports. Whoops. Let's just yank that real quick. And it uses, again, the same Nmap syntax. So if you just want to do ports, do -p, 135, 445, or whatever the heck you want to go after. Surprisingly enough, I'm actually in the process of rewriting this portion a lot because right now you're kind of tied to a reverse shell or bind shell. I'm trying to write my own one right now with actually some pretty good success, where it'll actually go out and do the auto own functionality but be able to specify your own payloads. So that's always a good thing. Or you can use Meterpreter. Good. So we're going to jump into a Meterpreter shell, the auto own, and basically you have full access, as you saw from the last presentation here. Oops. And typically it works. So, yeah, good. So that was a lot of the different types of attacks out there. Fast Track also has an update menu. Originally, Fast Track was designed for Backtrack. I do a lot of the package development on Backtrack, and specifically with it moving to an Ubuntu base, working a lot with the packaging the various tools out there. Prior to that, it was pretty tough to keep Backtrack up to date. And so I added some functionality to Fast Track that really went through and updated a lot of the main tools out there, like Aircrack, Metasploit, W3AF. If you're not familiar with that, it's a web exploitation framework. The Milworm exploits, some NIC2 plugins, and SQL map. And so it's pretty easy. I mean, you just go to the update menu. And here you can either update Fast Track only or update everything, which again is the ones I just previously listed. In the 4.0, I switched off. I had written my own update functionality, which if you didn't have an internet connection, sometimes it would actually remove all of Fast Track and a bunch of other good stuff. So learn not to reinvent the wheel here. So I switched to Subversion. So Fast Track's SVN based now, so any type of revisions you're going out and pulling is the latest and greatest. There's a bunch of different modes. And when I was designing Fast Track, it really was just an interactive mode originally. You saw the GUI mode. And let's go to the different modes here. Got a command line interface. So if you want to script it, definitely a good thing you could use with that. It has all the tools and functionalities within the command line as it does in the web GUI or the interactive mode. Additionally, it's also got an interactive mode, which I think I just repeated myself twice, which has all the different types of tools on there. And basically, I try to structure all of it the same as the web interface itself as well. So if you just go to exploits, you select whatever one you want to, back up, go to payload generator or whatever you want to. There's also tutorials, which I'll talk about at the end of this. But basically, all the tools that you want are at your disposal here. So now what? I just showed you a lot of different types of attacks with Fast Track that can be pretty devastating to an organization. A lot of these are common sense fixes. Some of them aren't. I mean, 10 years ago, SQL injection was released, and we still see that as probably the #1 exploited method of gaining access to the operating system to date. So for the SQL injection, the method used for that was specifically SQL injection on the website. SQL connects using a privileged account, if it's running under a privileged account. Database is running as an administrator on the system, and there's some error handling. So we saw the demo of that, of how we were actually used to attack the box using error-based SQL injection. Again, it also does blind-based with time-based attacks and all that good stuff. But actually, the programming behind it is pretty poor. He's doing a select statement where he doesn't sanitize any of the user input. He's not using any type of parameterized SQL queries or anything like that. Basically, what an attacker does is just injects his own SQL statement into that specific area right there and piggybacks his own database attacks onto that as well. So in the previous method, there was no centralized centralized sanitation of data method or any type of sanitation whatsoever. And they weren't using any type of stored procedures or any type of parameter SQL queries. The user account on the web application typically should make calls under a heavily restricted user account. So if it shouldn't be running under SA or any type of SA roles, really only needs access to what table it needs access to or whatever it needs to in the database and really refine it down. There's no apparent reason to run SQL Server as a system-level user. When you're installing SQL Server 2000, runs the system. SQL Server 2005 will actually run it as a limited account. However, 99% of the time that we see it out there, SQL Server 2005 is running a system. Why is that? Because the guys click the system account. Error handling should be controlled and not give any information whatsoever to the attacker itself. And again, not by notes, just by removing the error messages doesn't help you at all in any facet. It's really security through obscurity. However, it definitely makes it a little more challenging for the attacker itself. Is security integrated within the application's SDLC? As many heard of a systems development lifecycle? There's a whole process that goes in when you're developing a web app. And this is from a higher business like that. I usually don't throw out at the cons because I get booed and lemons thrown at me. But making sure security is integrated from the very conceivement of that application. So as you're going through, you have secure coding practices. You have security checking those and make sure that they're following them. You're doing periodic tests throughout it. And before it goes into production, you have a QA cycle where you actually go through and test it, do code reviews and all that good stuff, and then you release it to production. And then after it's in production, if you do any major code changes or versions, you go through and retest it again in the QA cycle. It's this big circle that goes around for security, which is always a good thing, right? On the MS SQL brooding, how do you prevent that? It's obviously a weak password policy. When the SQL server installs, typically you want to use Windows authentication. If it's mixed, if it's necessary, okay. Assign a heavily complex password to the SA account and don't use it for any of your web apps. Pretty simple. Buffer overflows, pretty easy to fix in a lot of cases. Just patch your darn systems. Third-party applications or your operating systems or your servers. Definitely a good patch management process. Installing some sort of HIPS is pretty good. Personally, I'm a big fan. I'm not a big Cisco guy in any regards. But I got to pen test a lot of cool products out there, and CSA is just a phenomenal product. Definitely one of the ones I definitely recommend for host-based intrusion prevention. And check your buffers if you're doing custom coding. Client-side attacks, not just relating to buffer overflows and patching, but client-side attacks are an easy way to get into network. If it's social engineering or a malicious website, a zero-day or an unpatched system, client-side attacks are gold mines for attackers. And I did write this before I was in your presentation. I just copy and pasted your slide, right? So there's a ton of controls that can be in place in the client computers. No administrative rights, period. Give them limited user accounts. It's a common theme we see in a lot of companies. A lot of companies use administrative privileges for their users. Bad idea. Minimum security baselines / hardening techniques. Making sure that you're developing hardening techniques for your specific systems and making sure that goes under rigorous review. Patch management, pretty self-explanatory. HIPS, CSA, good stuff. Again, we don't sell products or don't do any of that stuff, but CSA is pretty cool. AV, I guess. It's good for finding the major variants out there. If you guys don't know, antivirus is extremely trivial to bypass, whether it's Kaspersky or AVG or your Symantec or McAfee or Sophos. It's just trivial. I should be speaking at the InfoSec forums. I'm sorry, the InfoSec Security Summit here in Cleveland in a few months, and the name of my topic is the death of antivirus. We just showed different ways of how stupid these guys are for writing the signatures, and if there's any antivirus guys in here, I apologize. But these signatures are just ridiculous. Typically, they scan the first 100 or so bytes, and then after that, you're pretty much golden to do whatever you want to, whether it be a code cave or hijack executable flow to somewhere else or whatever you want to do. You can pretty much get past antivirus in any way you want to at this point. Content filtering is always a good thing. It's not a, there's no silver bullet for any of these ones I'm talking about, but make sure you do stringent content filtering. And all of your egress controls are up to date. You're only allowing essential ports out and that they're all being inspected. So making sure it's valid HTTP traffic and valid HTTPS traffic and all that good stuff. Behavioral-based analysis. There's a couple cool ones out there. If anybody's had a chance to take out, it's not really necessarily designed for security, but can be used for it, is Mizzou Networks has a really cool behavioral-based network traffic appliance, and it hooks into all your routers and switches and all that good stuff. And we'll actually look at behavior patterns of specific servers and look at behavior patterns of specific operating systems. It's extremely expensive. I think it's like 150 grand or something like that, but really cool. For more information on Fast Track, you can go to thepentest.com. I have demos of all of the things that I showed you here. I also got my ShmooCon presentation that I presented on the same thing, which is also up there. If you want to try Fast Track right now, that's the SVN address for it. Pretty cool stuff. It's also got a wiki and a bug tracker, so if you guys notice bugs, you can post it up there. It's also got a wiki to walk you through preventative measures of Fast Track, as well as the different types of attacks that you can do with Fast Track. A lot of cool stuff and a lot of good information up there. And also, it has the blinking lights on it as well, so you can actually test that out yourself. No script. And that's it. You can get it from thepentest.com and securestate.com. Does anybody have any questions? What's that? Oh, yes, there's also a Fast Track IRC channel on Freenode. So you can also go there. I'm usually hanging around there when my kid's not bothering me or my wife's not bothering me. So. Yes, we do. Yep, you can disable courtesy cell, absolutely. Yeah, definitely don't want to be flagging that you're there. About 3 days. 3 days. So Saturday and Sunday I'll be working heavily to get that tested out. So. Yes, it is. The Backtrack 4 beta has Fast Track also incorporated with it. The new version of Fast Track should be out here very short. I'm sorry, Backtrack should be out here shortly as well, which also includes it. What's that? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. We're actually very close with that. So the Backtrack 4 is winding down, so we should be definitely moving forward with that pretty quickly. Absolutely, yes. Yep. You just go update, and it'll go and pull the latest Subversion repository, and you're all set. So. Yes. The Fast Track version 4, what it does, I incorporated a dependency checker. So as I'm adding Python modules or I'm adding different functionality to it, it'll check to see if you actually have that and grab your current version of if it's Backtrack or Ubuntu, or I haven't done one for Gentoo yet, which Rick Farina has been killing me for that one. But tested on Backtrack 3, so it still works. I haven't tested on Backtrack 2. I know when Backtrack 2 came out, I think it was like Fast Track version 1 or something like that, and it was pretty rudimentary, so I'm not sure if that's going to work. But I know definitely for 3 and 4, it definitely works perfectly. So. And if it's just an FYI, it's not just for Backtrack. So if you download a base install of Ubuntu and you download it, there's Debian packages for it, as well as it's got an installer script. So it actually detects if you're running Ubuntu or Slackware, a bunch of different other ones, and it custom builds it for you based off of that. So there's definitely a cool install script with it as well. Anybody else have any other cool questions? It just doesn't, well, that's the tricky part I've been working on. I'm trying to get it so it only does it on 2008, but right now it does it for everything. If it detects what version you're running of SQL Server? No, it doesn't. No, what it tries first is tries to use the XP command shell store procedure. If it's disabled, it enables it, and then it tries going after it. It doesn't care if it's 2000, 2005 or not. It does Like for example, if the XP command shell stored procedure is disabled in 2000, it's a series of different commands than it is in 2005, so it'll try both of those. There's no way in blind SQL injection, at least not that I know of, that's very good at determining that, unless you do like a select add version and then pipe that to a text file and then send it over to you via some sort of transfer method, at least not that I'm aware of. I guess you can, there's probably a way of doing it, but I'm not sure of any. But typically it just does it regardless of it. So if it's a 2000 server, 2003 or 2008, it'll try disabling that regardless. Any other questions? Well, hey, no lemons thrown at me. I appreciate that, guys. I really do, seriously. Thanks. Let's pop a box.